Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brand, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. This is, of course, on the heels of the defeat against the ASEAN All-Stars. We'll talk a little bit about United's their game in Hong Kong tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit about obviously the friendly that was played yesterday. I didn't see it. I was on an airplane coming back from New York, but I've obviously seen a lot of the commentary around it. We'll talk a lot about obviously transfers, Garnacho, Hoyland, Delap, Osman, and Buemo, and some other United related news. So apologies about Monday, Jamesy. I was in NYC and had a great
Yes.
trip. So it's unfortunately it couldn't work out, but I'm glad that I'm here. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, doing well. It's been a as you were we were talking about this earlier, but when it comes to United, it's like a week is a long time, and when we have 10 days between, it feels
Mm.
like the whole world has changed in those 10 days
100%.
at United. That's how it is. So, we've had a lot. I mean, we did one after the final, and even then
Mm.
that feels like ages ago. Just not having it on
I
Monday.
know
So,
that really
it's
does.
crazy.
I
But
was
yeah.
Yeah, I only saw I was flying out on Sunday, so I only saw bits and pieces of the Villa game.
Yep.
We didn't obviously record after that. Um, we'll browse over that a little bit. So because there
Yes.
are positives there, Jamesy.
Yeah, there
But,
were. There were.
yeah, the last podcast we did together was quite macabre. It's definitely look. We say we kind of joke about that, but sometimes you think about like there's a line where you just
Mhm.
where people are already depressed out of their mind,
Yeah.
and just about life in general, and
Yeah.
then United obviously, and there's a threshold that I don't want to cross.
Oh,
Who
yeah.
wants to listen to
It's
that?
like how
Everyone,
much how much dooming
yeah,
can we do on this, to add to people's
of course.
misery and suffering? Like, we gotta
Yeah,
look
well, I
for
mean,
for hope in some places?
what else could we say about the
Yeah.
season that people don't already know?
Yeah.
So, you know, then they go out and play quite well
Mm.
against Villa.
A
Win
big
2-0.
game. They were chasing the Champions League. This is like as good as a cup final for them. That game for Villa meant as much, just about, as
Mhm.
Tottenham in the Europa League final for them, not for us, but for them.
United did get a wee bit lucky. I
Oh, just
thought,
a little bit.
I I've never been 100% convinced that Bandier had both of his hands on the. I don't know what
Yeah,
he was
I
doing.
know. I know.
Like I mean, I'm watching it and I'm going, forget about the decision for a minute. What is he doing?
Mm,
Like,
yeah.
why is this every week, every other week? There's some unforeseen, like unimaginable catastrophe where you're just going. I You would see one of these a season, and two of them would have been fatal. United, I mean, Taibbi got 3 games or something, 4 games, and it was fatal. Mark Bosnich's got one season, didn't even have a bad season too.
Mm,
Tim Howard's, same, after Porto, and now it's just a regular occurrence. But some positives in that game, TMZ. You know, if it had been any other day, if that was the second or third game of the season, we'd be talking about that being an exceptional win.
for sure, for sure. And it's funny because even despite that, you got a little bit of luck with that on the call. We got a red card on Emi Martinez at the end of the half, which was
Yeah,
a solid red card. I
yeah,
mean, he made the
100%. Yep.
mistake, so there's no doubt about that. Um, but before that, United probably should have scored 2 or 3 goals even. I
Mhm.
mean, it is funny though, because even in the positives, it almost makes the problems just that much more apparent, because that was
Mhm.
like a 5-0 game. That game was like that was a battering. First 20, 30 minutes, United were getting shots, chances, point blank, accumulating, just
Yeah.
battering them. Still can't find the net. And that's not to mention the chances that don't even go down as chances. But there was a lot of good things. The way that they created, the way that the team played together. They were, it was all angles. It wasn't just like, well, one guy's doing one thing to make it happen. Until but we still couldn't score. And then Ahmad, the smallest man on the pitch, pops up again with a header at the back post. Like how many, you know,
Unbelievable.
it's you gotta respect the mental aspect of football. It's something that is really, I think, goes under the radar with a lot of the tactical looks and analysis and stats and things like that. Is, man, there is a determination, and I know you've said it before, like the actual talent that separates some of these
Mm,
guys is not that big. Even from Premier League to Championship to league, like the talent gap is not necessarily that massive, but there is a mental determination. You cannot tell me that it is just talent why Ahmad can find the ability to get on the end of those headers, things like that. And I mean, the first goal he scored for United was like against AC Milan years and years ago, was some insane
mhm.
in the air header like that. And we've got 6 foot guys all over the place that can't get on the end of these things. And I think that mental determination and drive is like that. I don't know. We call it what, the intangibles in the US. That's what it's always referred to in American sports as something to take note of players, as the guys who have that, because it matters, doesn't it?
Ginger, when I use differences or similarities in boxing and stuff, and one of the things, do you want to hit the target or do you want to punch through the target?
Yeah.
Okay. So how you execute, the intensity with which you execute, is when you've got similarities in talent, it's the intensity of the execution is where you see how badly a team wants to win.
Yep.
We've said this on the podcast before. You can always tell a lot about a team, their cohesion,
Mm.
their commitment to win by how they defend. Because those are
Yep.
the things that you don't want. No one really, even defenders don't want to defend, right?
Yep.
And when I was looking at United earlier in the season, conceding a lot of goals from set pieces, I remember saying on this
Mm.
podcast, one of the reasons that I think that's unforgivable is once that ball gets in the air, it's about who wants it more. That's it,
Correct. Yeah.
right?
Yep. I don't.
And the guy that wants it more is usually the one that wins it.
Yep.
So once that ball's in the air, you know, football ability more or less goes out of the window
Yep.
because now it's about physique, it's about it's about obviously you're taught how to hit a ball, but you know most people, there's not a lot of variance between
Mm.
skill of heading the ball amongst footballers, so to
Yeah.
see someone like Ahmad, want that, have that hunger, and to me, and we said this on the podcast last week, United's season, this season, being the 25-26 season, started when they played Villa.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that these players and why I didn't, one of the reasons why the result sort of irritated me a bit yesterday was United need to, considering the season they've just had, United need to create an environment where they're embarrassed to lose games,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Where you're going out to play ASEAN All Stars. Yes, the result is not consequential in terms of pursuing trophies or anything, but it's consequential in terms of you need to be embarrassed to lose. You need to play for the shirt. This is unacceptable. You
Mm-hmm.
need to go out here. I mean, winning is a habit, and considering United hadn't won 2 back-to-back Premier League games all season, if they'd beat Villa and won this preseason friendly, which, as I said, the result doesn't matter, but it's about creating the right habits, James. And the
Yep.
habits are, United should not be okay with losing these games. Like I think I don't think that is something that we should just dismiss and go. Well, it's just a preseason friendly, yeah. But you know what? These players need to start showing an attitude where they're embarrassed to lose.
Yeah, and it's hard to read too much into it, but at the same time, I think Ruben Amorim would agree with you, because he said that they were
Mhm.
getting booed, and he said
Yeah,
maybe these guys need to be booed more,
yeah.
because we go play in the Premier League and they lose, and the fans still show up, and so it makes it okay. It's like maybe they need to be booed more often.
Mm,
I think he's certainly taken that perspective. I think as we've reached the end of the season,
mhm,
Amorim's definitely entered a little bit of a a little bit of maybe a I mean, he said he's certainly lost his cool a few times through the season. We know that. Said some
mhm.
things he might regret through the season. We know that. but he certainly is wearing his heart on his sleeve a bit more and more as
Yeah,
as we get to the
he's
end of
become
the
a bit more
season here.
yeah, a bit more
Yeah.
abrasive, a bit more caustic, and
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, mate, go ahead. I've
No,
noticed
but
that
that's
too.
what I agree. Those words were right, but I think that I do think he's in control of it in this instance. Like I don't think
Yeah.
he's actually losing his shit. I think
No,
he's
I
actually
agree with
knows
that, yeah.
exactly what he's doing right
Mhm.
now because I think he's really impressing upon the point that all right, we've gone through all of this and now it really really does have to change and it's become completely unacceptable and he doesn't want them to sit and go and say, "Oh, that season's done. Now everybody can relax. Now everybody can coast, Now everybody can just chill. It's a fresh
Yeah.
start. We'll be okay
Mhm.
next year." He doesn't want that at all. He doesn't accept that. He doesn't believe that. And there is a difference, I think. It's one of the reasons it can be very stressful for a manager, where and I think there's similarities to things like this in life because you can't turn it off and say, "Well, I'll hope for next
Mhm.
season," because you're
Yep.
responsible for so much more than
Mhm.
than the one player who can just say,
Mhm.
next year I'm just going to turn up and I'm going to play better. He's got to figure, they've got to figure a lot more out, and I think he's doing that on purpose, no doubt about that, and making it very clear how he feels.
Yeah, I mean, look, I I I think he's been told he's gonna stay.
Hmm.
He's if you look at to be fair to him, he's not shirked responsibility. Whether you agree
Yeah,
with his decisions or not,
yeah,
the Garnacho thing, I think Ruben Amorim responded exactly how he should respond in that
yeah,
situation. It's absolutely vital because that's not just about who wins between Garnacho and Amorim. That's about Amorim what make set an example to everyone else
yeah,
what's acceptable, what's not.
yeah,
Obviously, we've seen it with Marcus Rashford, we've seen it with Anthony, we've seen it with other players where he has had a steadfast refusal to tolerate certain things. But um, with that being said, James, I think that if there maybe is a critique to be had of Amarim saying, okay, then maybe be a little bit more me be a little bit more precise, choose your
right,
words a
yeah,
bit more
yeah,
carefully with some of the things.
yeah,
Like when Ahmad was asked about, which I don't understand why Ahmad would be being asked this question, but about Garnacho's future, and he's laughing. I don't think that's a good look. Like
sure,
I'm trying to be really kind and
yeah,
think what possibly could he have found funny in that moment. Like to me, I'm not gonna defend Garnacho, but that would piss me off. Like I don't
sure.
know what's funny about that.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine that to a little bit of the humor is the fact of the question itself being asked to Ahmad. It's like,
Yeah,
you
I
know
know.
what you're
Why ask
doing. You know
him?
what I mean? Like, you know what you're doing as if a journalist is asking Ahmad about that, they know they're looking for something to, to
Yeah,
write a story,
I
and
agree,
that I
but
can find the humor in a
I
little
honest
bit, but
but we're
you know,
guessing, mate, right?
yeah,
And to
of
me,
course, yeah,
like we're still talking about one of the exceptional young talents
yeah,
that once if you get if you get in a situation where you need to become desperate sellers,
yeah,
that doesn't help them.
sure, correct, yeah,
And to me, like you always have to have leave the door open for the possibility of what if he doesn't go? You now
yeah,
have to work with this young footballer, and you're going to need to because this young lad is someone that is still on his day a very good player. I agreed with Ten Hag when he did it with Ronaldo. We had to do it.
hmm,
Um, but I think that like that type of thing isn't good for United as a football club because like for Marcus Rashford, for example, if United are of the opinion there's absolutely no way he can come back here,
right,
that strength that weakens your hand in negotiations.
sure, correct, yes,
Right now, you could
yes,
communicate this privately.
yep,
Um, and as I said on the podcast last week, um, that may have changed since then. But no one had communicated with Marcus Rashford's team about what their plans were over
right,
the summer.
yeah,
So, to me, like I think, okay, Sancho,
mhm,
he has to be sold. I understand there's no way he can come back. But to me, when you're doing that with players, I just don't think it festers a relationship of respect between manager and player. Like I don't like that, but maybe I'm being overly critical.
Guess we'll find out how it plays out, right? At the end of the day, it's like what happens, and I do think there are times I think he's been harsh, but I also think it's like you can get a course correction, right? And usually the pendulum can swing the other way a bit too far when you're trying to correct, when we've talked about things like the culture, when we've talked about these things. I think it's somewhat normal the pendulum can swing a little bit too far in the other direction, and I think that's happened probably across United a bit. When we talk about all the things that have changed, we've probably seen things swing too far in one direction, and then finding the right spot to
Well, let
deal
me
with
ask you a
things. To
question
yeah,
about
yeah,
that because one of the things that I've noticed is that you know decorum and etiquette changes over time, right?
yeah,
And with these current crop of new younger managers, they're not a,
mm,
they're not afraid to come out and be very direct. Like I've seen Maresca do it.
yes,
I've
yeah,
seen Arnold Flat
true,
do it over Nunez, right? Where 10 years ago, that would have
mm,
stood out like, wow,
yeah,
that is very, very rare. I still remember the 2 or 3 times. I remember Ferguson when he was asked about Van Nistelrooy missing a penalty, and he goes, "No, I should have scored. That's a bad miss." And going, "Wow, that's really
mm,
unusual." But in
yeah.
American sports, James, is that do you see that more in American sports where coaches, have a different expectation of etiquette where they will come out. American journalists are getting access to locker rooms like
Mm.
right up close in the
Deep
way.
in there, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they have way more
but
access. Yeah.
yeah, but do you see in American sports coaches with the same parameters and the same expectations, or do they go after players directly in the media?
What's different about it is I think it's probably a bit of a reaction to the difference in situation because of the way that managers in football and have been kind of deified. You don't really
Yeah,
get that in the US with the coaches
yeah,
here. It's like, he's good, he's shit, he's bad. They'll sack a coach and put a new
yeah.
one in, and it's like not a big deal. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I live very close to the Nuggets coach who got canned like 2 weeks ago. He got like
Oh,
canned like
oh,
2 weeks left of the season. Everybody just moves on. Like, and
mm,
they were going into the playoffs. Like, imagine you're going into towards the final of, for anybody who's not following on American sports, but it's like you're going into the knockout rounds of the Champions League and you just sack your coach. And they just pick
yeah,
up a guy from the assistant coach, put him in place, and now he'll be here next year. And it's like, but I think the difference is that like everybody thinks about, because there's so much more access to the players and there's so much more front and center to media, to journalists, to questions, to interviews, to
yeah,
brands. They're on TV all the time, they're doing shit 24/7 as a person. Like, they're the guy, they're the face of the team, is never the coach in American sports
mm.
anymore. It may have been 20, 30 years ago, but it's
Belichick, wait,
never the
maybe
coach.
there was an odd exception with Belichick or something to the Patriots,
Yeah,
but
maybe. But then it's Tom
he
Brady,
got
like,
fired like 2 years
yeah,
after,
yeah.
you
After
know,
Brady leaves, it's over, right?
yeah,
And so I think that some of the reaction here is I think that younger coaches are kind of pushing back. Like, you
mm,
don't call out the players sometimes by name, behaviors, things like that, then it's
mm,
all on you, and they don't want to be that type of relationship anymore, where it's like,
yeah,
well, I can't be the guy taking all the blame for everything all the time. You know what I mean? And it's like, so it's a little bit of an Americanization, because I think you don't get coaches necessarily blaming players that way, but you look at after a game, who goes after a basketball game? It's not
yeah,
the coach. Two players go up, they sit there, they have to answer all the questions, they have to,
mm,
explain what happened, they have to do all that. They have to do it themselves, so the coach doesn't have to, and they have to say, I played like shit and I did this and I did that, and it's a little different.
I think in one sense I sort of sympathize with players a bit in
Yeah.
that, look, you're quite right. If they go on the field and score a hat trick, they're not coming off said, you know what, all the praise goes to the boss, right?
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't have won without. And
Yeah.
then, but when they lose,
Yeah.
oh, well, Gaffer's fault. But
Mm.
I look at that and I'm thinking, obviously things have changed a lot, but the slight defense of the players, James, because of social media now, you
Mhm.
know, if you criticize someone, the crescendo, right?
Yeah.
That results in people just sending a deluge of
Mm.
messages, that players see, that families see. I mean, we saw Anthony's interview. When you
Mhm.
talk about mental, you're quite correct. Like that is a big concern.
Yep.
You look at this, you're going, does this help? Is this helping getting the best out of a player? Some people have different personalities. Some people have a
Yeah.
personality where that provokes an angry, motivated response. But in others it doesn't, and it just depends on your environment, depends what's like at home, the support, what your
Yep.
your reputation is. There's just so many variables, and I just don't know if it helps, because I just think they don't have any rate of reply,
Mhm.
certainly not on any equitable level. So
Right.
therefore, go to the media and leak things to the media, and then you get this game of tit for tat. And so
Yeah.
I think some like to me, you can generally criticize, like, what, we had four chances, Rasmus, just didn't have a great game, whatever. But if you're going to say something like Cheeto Obi's movement is naive, like, that's very specific, and I think that is something that does land a blow on a player. And yeah, to me, I just think maybe it's not the most helpful thing. Let's talk about young Garnacho, James, because young Garnacho since January has looked like a player that doesn't want to be at United.
Mhm.
And some of this to me was preventable, because United easily could have, talked to Garnacho about his brother and made that go away.
Yeah. It's been that way a
Because
long time. Yeah.
wherever he goes next, that dynamic won't come with them. Right, there'll be no Roberto Garnacho posting things on. And look, they're still young kids. That it's a very, very tough environment to walk perfectly. When you're a young 20, 21 year old, like, it's really difficult. And he
Yep.
loves his brother, and I understand, like, but there's just certain things you can't do.
Mhm.
His interview after, we talked about this after the Europa League final, was, to me, something that he was angry, he was young. It's not that I don't think that is something that would be terminal for me. I would never forgive him over. Like, to me, I can brush it off. Like, it's not a big deal. If he stayed at United and played well, I'd forget about this in 2 seconds. It's not Jadon Sancho to me. But he didn't look particularly happy in Kuala Lumpur either. Um, Two things on this. One, and we've been saying this for a long time, I do believe United will sell Garnacho this summer. But James, United have completely changed their identity. Their
Mhm.
wingers are gone, right? And when I'm sitting listening to Amarim say, we're budget wise, we might not be able to do a lot, I'm going, why didn't Jason Wilcox and all that who's bringing him here, say, okay, we're taking a massive risk here, because
Yep.
to give this guy the squad that he needs, we're going to have to sell Marcus Rashford. We're going to have to sell Garnacho. We're going to have to sell Anthony, the wing. And people might say, good, that's fine. But then the amount of change that United need to fit this system is massive.
Yeah.
And you have to have a budget. And to me, if Amarim doesn't get 4 or 5 really good players this summer, James, I think you'll lose what you built, because it'll fall apart.
Yeah, well, it is a challenge, and it's like the thing about it is that again, I will say, which I agreed with. We've talked about it before. I'll say which I agreed with, because I was reading something from the Athletic kind of summary on this as well, and they called it like the original sin being as well still last summer, because it would have helped having last summer's budget, last summer's decisions, last summer's everything if you wanted to start fresh with a new manager, right? At least then you would have had one more summer. You would have been able to work straight towards that. Even there, of having to do it mid-season doesn't help. I think it's personally like I think there's two sides to this coin, which is it's probably if you're going to rip the team up, it's probably something that does need to happen to a degree and has probably been needed to happen for a long time. I mean, in American sports or in NBA, they call, they just say, we're just going to, they're going to blow it up this season. They're going to sell everybody off and they're going to restart and
Mhm.
all of that. It probably is a little overdue for that to happen. And United are at their lowest point, and there'll be one game a season next year. And you don't have to compete in all these competitions, so you can run a bit of a smaller squad. So maybe you can get away with less than you needed last season. You're not in
Mhm.
Europe anymore, so you can get away, just numbers wise. You can get away with a little bit less, but it has to work because you've had this so negative of a season with him there, because you had him come in early. They have to do a really, really good job on that to get enough players in that it actually does change and has a good impact on results
Mhm.
and actually brings United upwards on a strong upwards trend towards positivity, but towards as well the top end of the table. And I think it's doable, but this is what they got to do. And I think it's why we broached the topic last week of Bruno. Like, is it the right time then for all parties for him to maybe say, maybe I move now, maybe I go now? Because there's the money aspect of it, of being able to utilize that for the club to say, we're at our bottom.
Mhm.
Bruno going to sit here through 2 years of shit, and be 32, 33 years old, and before we're actually competing
Mhm.
anymore at all? Or could he go somewhere else? Can he go for whatever reason? I'm not going to blame him in any case, like whether it's to win trophies, whether it's for generational wealth. Like, these are all acceptable motivations
Sure.
for
Yeah.
an individual to make a
Well,
choice in life. Um, and nobody could hold him against him. I mean, sometimes I look at it when a player's 20 and I'm like, if you have a
of course.
bright future, you're like, why would you go now?
Of
But when
course.
you're towards the end of your career, it's also like, well, sure, why not? Um, and I just look at those things and think, you know, um, they need to do really well though. They do, and some of that is certainly selling and raising funds because the money's just not there. Um, they got Cunha in the door, which I think is great.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really good signing. It's the type that we should be making. Um, Old enough and experienced enough that you don't have to wait years. He will have an
Yeah.
instant impact, but young
Yes.
enough that he will be here for a good 5 years solidly as a top
Yeah.
performer. I'd like us to get more of that, but that's going to cost money. Like the names, well, I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. You're going to need money for that.
Look, maybe I'm talking out of my arse here, right? There's a fair possibility. But
We never
one of
do
the no, uh,
that.
this never happened. Um, one of the positives, well, I'll say it's a positive, but when United have failed to qualify for the top four in the past, they've tried to just tart up a squad to get them in the top four.
Yes, yes.
And it's held together, with tape and glue.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're always trying to circumvent the necessary steps you have to take. Um, and when you so that if you do it from here and say, look, we finished 15th, not because we didn't deserve to. So instead of trying to bring in 3 or 4 players this summer just to get a Champions League finish, we're not going to be able to skip the intermediary steps. We're going to have to build, we're going to have to build a structure at every level that is, rock solid. So that
Mhm,
if you don't finish fourth, you finish fifth,
mhm.
and you finish sixth,
Not
within
12th,
a
yeah,
reasonable margin of error.
yeah.
You're not finishing because the football club structurally just isn't going to allow for that level of failure, right?
Yes.
So you have to decrease the failure points. So the failure points that you did when you're just trying to get a bit of momentum, no solid foundations, bringing in this player, bringing in that player, bringing in Ibrahimovic, bringing in a Cavani,
Yeah, yeah,
and bringing in, Rafael Varane at the end of 29. And okay, we're not going to finish top four, but maybe we finish eighth,
yeah.
but that's going to mean that we're not going to, we're never going to be back in 15th. There are certain steps you
Correct.
can't skip, right?
Yes, yes.
And having a true appraisal of where you're at and saying, look, We've young players. We need to get rid of a lot of players that provide no value. Don't be
Yeah.
getting upset that players who finish 15th are now being shifted on, right?
Yeah.
And so the only way we can rebuild this is, yes, we'll invest in the market, but also very important that we have a very strong academy that provides
Yeah.
players for that first team. City spent 180 million in January, James, right?
I know.
And it never gets mentioned. Ruben
Mm.
Amorim's summer budget will be less than that.
Yeah. Well,
So
and that sorry, I just want to mention that's the other
yes,
factor. It's like you just blow all the money. So I understand how
yeah,
this can sound, but you go blow all the money in summer on older players and things and such to just
yeah,
try to race. Then you get to January, you have an injury, you have setbacks, and you have no
mhm,
money to fix the problem mid-season. And how many teams have improved by making Jan? I mean, I believe Virgil van Dijk was brought in January for
yeah.
Liverpool, if I'm not
He, he
mistaken. It's
was,
like there's teams who've bought and Bruno Fernandes was brought in. It was one of the times they got it right under Solskjaer. They were able to
yeah.
find the money for him in January to save the season because it was headed for catastrophe.
Oh, it was
And it's like
disaster.
having some flexibility to bring to bring the levels up. And if something happens, is part of that too.
I agree, and I think also for Abraham Amorim to come out and say stuff like, "Look, we want to win the league, we want to finish the Champions League, but we have to be realistic here, right? Because some of that pressure needs to be taken off some of the younger players.
Yes, yes.
Dorgu, Euro. If you aren't sitting around top four by October, you get slaughtered. That doesn't
Yeah,
happen at Brighton. That doesn't happen at
correct.
Bournemouth.
Yes.
That's why, they can have the seasons they have because
Yep.
morale inside their club isn't destroyed
Mm,
because they're not in the top two or three.
yep.
They still have their still collective commitment to a goal that's achievable. If you say to United next season and say, I'm not saying Amorim isn't under enormous pressure to be successful and that should be forgiven, but you know what? If United's finished sixth or something next season,
Yep.
okay, and that there was more solid. It was as a result of solid incremental growth that gave United a springboard next summer to say, okay, look, we're on solid footing here. The foundations are in good place. Now let's add to the squad and let's get up. If you look at Arteta, I think Arteta finished fifth or sixth with Arsenal, and then the next season they had a Premier League. They should have won the league 2 years ago. So to me, I think realistically, United's target for next season should be to get rid of all, the drama, to have a football club that's not dealing with redundancies and not dealing with, 2-star food ratings, and you're not dealing with the constant deluge of bullshit, right? It's
Yeah.
just a football club climbing its way back up to the top. And we're not going to win the league next season, but if we put solid foundations in place, right? And that's the target rather than just top four, then to me, like Amorim said, if we don't do stuff like this, we're going to be back here a year from
Yeah.
now. I want to make sure that United as a football club, when they feel that curve, that curve doesn't have that broad of, we flatten it a bit so
Yeah.
that the
Correct.
curve
Yeah.
of failure success,
Yep.
is not what we're having right now. And look, maybe with Bruno Fernandes, he's the Coutinho. When Liverpool
Yeah.
sold Coutinho, which seemed ridiculous, that really was the moment where they could invest and bring in other players. So to me, Bruno Fernandes, amazing player. I'd be devastated to lose him, but if it meant that Amorim could bring in two or three other players, it might be worth looking at.
Sure, and it's worth mentioning because I mean you never know with these deadlines and things like that. Because we heard about a 72-hour deadline, and then there was a new 72-hour deadline apparently as of Tuesday. But today, um, Bruno's agent, who's also his brother-in-law, just for anybody who doesn't know, so it's not accidental when these things happen, is in Saudi, being pictured at a hotel there near where they're having some discussions about. Al Ali over there, and that's where apparently has an offer from. So it's worth thinking to see whether this happens or not. I mean, I guess I would have to say just the fact that it hasn't been put to bed tends to generally mean
Correct.
there's at least something in it, because if there's nothing in it, it's very easy for anybody in the United
What
space,
would
in the
you do, man?
journalistic space. What's
What would
that?
you do, Jamesy? What would you do? Would you, if you're Emery, would you sell him?
It's hard. It's a question that a lot of times I feel you have to take out of the manager's hands, right? Because I think in most cases, managers would not sell because it's like, why would I want to sell? Because they don't want to be the accountant. They want
Mm.
the players, but they don't want to be the money guy at the same time. But there's also the reality, I think, in modern sports, where they all have to understand the money situation.
Yeah,
Um, and so it is a challenge because it's like Ruben Amorim will look at him and say, "This is for me, my best player.
yeah.
This is for me, a guy I'm reliant on every day." It's up to the hierarchy to say, if Wilcox to Omar to say, "Look, if we need to do this, we have to convince Ruben it's
This
going
is
to
a
be
really good
better.
point.
It's going
I
to be
think you
better
brought up
without him."
two really good points there. One, there's a you can't sell him over his head, but there's
Yes.
also a threshold where this is not a business decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate that, under normal circumstances, we would not sell Bruno Fernandes, but when someone comes along and offers the business this type of money, you don't have a choice. Like, there's been players that have been sold where you've had clubs have made offers for them that's just at such a high level where,
Yes.
it's incredible amount of money. And at the end of the day, every footballer on the planet has a price. There's a price where you could get any footballer where, if someone comes along and offers Barcelona,
Mm.
$1.5 billion for Lamine Yamal, they're not asking Hansi Flick, do you want to sell him or not? That's not his. That not becomes
Yeah. It's
a
somebody
the
else's call
business
now.
decision
Yeah.
because it's so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this guy could be out of a job in 3 months.
Yeah.
So. And I think managers. I mean, this is something that managers of football clubs they aren't in the top 3 or 4 clubs in the country have to deal with every
Yeah.
single
It's
day.
every single day. Yep.
Bayer Leverkusen revert. So yeah, no, that's a good the premise because there's two arguments there, and I think when you first said that's one you don't give the manager a choice on, I sort of bristled a bit, and I thought, well, actually, you're right. That is something where it's just at such a high number
Yeah.
that you can't say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so exactly. But of course you want him to be happy. And that's where I think the job is. You got to convince him you're going to do
yeah,
better. And then you have to execute it if you do something like that. Because what you can't do is screw it up. I mean, you got to say Liverpool did a good job of it. They replaced him, I think,
yeah,
with Virgil van Dijk and Allison, who were two of the best players in the world for them after that. When
yeah.
they did that to with Coutinho, you have to don't screw it
Mhm.
up. That's all. And we won't know till later if they sell it, if it works out or not, but don't screw it up. That's what I would say.
Outside of obviously Johnny Evans, Lindelof gone,
Ericsson,
Ericsson
yeah.
will be
Yep.
gone. Um, I watched the Chelsea Betis game yesterday, and the Anthony that I saw against Chelsea was the Anthony that we've seen every week at Manchester
Mhm.
United. Where I'm like, okay, you know what? That 10% of me that wanted him back after what it is now down to
Yeah.
zero. Like I
Yeah.
think that there's other offers on the table for
Yep.
Anthony. I think there'll be a number of clubs in Spain be interested in him.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
Obviously, I'm pretty confident Marcus Rashford will go. Um, United will get a cash boost from the Alvaro Fernandez sale because it looks like he's going to go
Yes.
to Real
And a big
Madrid.
one too, which is
Yeah,
nice. Yeah.
possibly if Mason Greenwood goes, they have
Yep.
a 50% sell on cause on that. So Garnacho
Mhm.
United are allegedly in Naples to talk to Napoli about Garnacho possibly going there. I think uh, with obviously the potential of Osimhen being included in some type of deal. Hoyland, uh, you mentioned yesterday that there was legitimate interest in Hoyland from Italy.
Mhm.
So why don't we run through these, mate? So what do you think with Garnacho?
Yeah, I think Antonio Conte staying at Napoli, which
Was that
wasn't looking
confirmed?
like. Yeah, yeah, Fabrizio and Di Marzio and them have confirmed now they've worked it out to stay, you know, new contract, plans for to how to reinforce the squad, all of that, obviously following them winning the league. I think that represents a real opportunity. You look at Scott McTominay winning the title for them, essentially. They're going to be looking with some favor, I think, on the players that they might bring in. It is kind of funny, we sold a number of players from
Mhm.
way back, we did a bit of a clear out of players to Inter, and they went and won a title with them, with a bunch of them. And then, now I'm looking at Napoli in a similar way. So I think that that could help because there's definitely interest from Conte in Garnacho in January, and talks over that happening. And I think De Laurentiis, the president, even said they were down to discussing wages with Garnacho at that time. They made a £48 million offer, 48 million euros offer. That probably, if they come back with a similar
Mhm.
offer to what they make in January, it probably gets done. Um, Eric Ten Hag being appointed for coach of Leverkusen. There's
Mhm.
actually decent reports out of Germany as well that he might maintain an interest in Garnacho, might maintain an interest in Anthony. Um, so I think Garnacho will very, very much go. There's also clubs in England that could certainly come back in for him too. And I don't think United will be too picky about where they sell at this point in time, given the situation.
Mhm.
They'll let him go. So I think that one's going to happen. I don't know where yet because there might be he is a young player with potential. There might be a lot of options that pop up over the course of summer.
Uh, Malasia.
He's going to go somewhere, but he's not. They're not executing that option, right? From what I understand, the Conte
I haven't been paying attention. Has he
they
been
won a
playing?
title over there, PSV, but apparently they're not executing the option. But he's going to go somewhere, so it'll be affordable. I mean, United don't have to sell for much. He'll go start his career up somewhere else
Yeah,
again. I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
What about Rasmus Højlund? You were saying I was looking at one of your tweets yesterday saying that there's some
Yeah.
interest in him.
Inter for sure have some interest in there. There's a potentially some from Juventus as well, who are looking for more goal scorers in their team as well. Obviously, he was more successful in Italy. I'd be offering him back to Atalanta as well, considering the guy who purchased him is their director now
And
too.
United really do like Ederson. You know, Jamesy,
Yeah, they do. Go on,
I
go for it. Yeah,
think McTominay has probably added some value to United's players in Italy because
yeah,
he's just been such a resounding success that
yeah.
I think that that has increased the appetite of because now it looks like United are the problem. If we can get him out of here, we might see a top young player. Sorry, so Højlund possibly Juventus.
Yeah, Juventus, Inter. I think that one's certainly up in the air, but they're definitely look. That one's a trickier because of the
Mhm.
value remaining. It's more likely it's going to be a loan or something like
Yeah,
that. I think a loan. Maybe you get an option. Maybe you get an obligation for a year from now when the value, the amortization, the numbers, all that crap is lower. So, because nobody's going to pay 40 million today. His value's at his lowest. But somebody will probably take him on a loan. I would suspect.
I think that it would be a mistake. I think that United should loan him out.
Yep.
I don't think he's gonna. If he was to go to Italy and play, I don't think he'd have a worse season than what he had for
No.
Atalanta.
No, I don't
And
think so either. Yeah.
yeah, I think that for him and United, that would be the best option.
Yep.
And look, who knows? Maybe a year from now, Holland's had a great season. United are a totally different football club. Maybe say you bring him back. I don't know, but I don't think that he should be someone that they should sell right now. Obviously, with Marcus Rashford, TMZ, looks very. I would be amazed if Marcus Rashford stays at the football club. I know there was a report yesterday or the day before saying that Amarim had been told that he needed to try to repair a relationship and prepare for that reintegration. Now, that certainly wasn't the case last weekend.
Right.
I would be amazed if that conversation actually did happen, because it's more than Ruben Amorim.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
don't think that will happen.
Correct. Yes.
Marcus would have went to Barcelona in January if Ansu Fati had been sold.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but Ansu Fati looks like he's leaving, and
Yep.
I think I don't know what's going to happen there, but I think that I'd be amazed if I ever saw Marcus Rashford in a United shirt again. And when I look at stuff like Anthony James, some of the stuff that he's been saying, I understand fans. When you're not in possession of information, you form an opinion. That's fair. That's what we all do, right?
Yep.
And you then you emotionally commit to that particular view. That's fair. That's what we all do. But there's more information that is not out there
Yeah.
that has a major impact on how a player develops, on their happiness, on their attitude,
Mhm.
and this is something that United have to fix. They have to have a football club where players
Yep.
can come and be successful and develop. And when you're talking about culture and environment, that's a responsibility of the football clubs, and they have to change that. It won't be enough for Ruben Amorim just to put his foot down, because we've seen this before. It needs to be supported by an exceptional professional environment around
Yep.
him. And so, Anthony, what do you think will happen there?
Yeah, I think Anthony will probably go to Betis. Won't be able to pay 30 million. That much is for sure. They're not a club that tend to have that kind of money, from what I believe. Um, but I could see them doing a loan with an obligation, which would probably suit United for a bit of a lower amount. Apparently, Atletico are interested, and then again, Leverkusen. There's actually potentially some legs in that too for him to rejoin Ten Hag over there.
Oh, and they'll have a pretty penny to spend after selling Florian Wirtz, so they will
150
sure.
million, yeah.
Yeah, but I think Anthony. There'll be some interest in him in Spain. I think
Yeah,
he's in Atletico. And if I'm Atletico, thinking about some of the signings they've made over the years, I don't think United would be totally unreasonable with asking for 40 million.
yeah,
And I think that you look at what Barca paid for Rafinha and stuff. Like
yeah.
I think that
Well, he's
he-
doing what he did in Spain, right? So it's the same league, so it's
yeah,
gotta be valuable.
and he's young. And to me,
Yeah.
like that's a snip. So, Jadon Sancho scored yesterday, of course.
Yeah.
And know you tweeted about it earlier, but I was reading on Sky that there's discussions taking place right now. I would expect that Sancho will stay at Chelsea.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and obviously it was a slightly unique situation where he didn't agree a contract before the loan, basically, probably because of this kind of weirdness with the clauses and stuff. So, he was on too big a wages here. Like Chelsea don't want to pay him 250,000 a week.
Yeah,
But he only has 1 year remaining on his United contract
with
now.
an option
So
of
it's
another year, right?
right, but the club would have to execute that, right? So
Yeah.
technically, like when you look at it, he's not going to be owed a bunch of wages,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah, yeah. From that
sometimes can
perspective,
hold up
yes,
a
yes, yes.
deal.
Yeah,
So if he's going to accept a wage cut on their side, he's only missing a small amount of his owed wages from United, and getting a new contract in return. So I think it'll be fine. I think it'll happen. I think
yeah.
they'll end up agreeing, and you know, there's probably going to be little bits of money that change hands behind the scenes on a deal like this. Not like under the radar, but just you don't always hear about all the details of little
Mm.
fees and little payoffs and things like that happen. There'll
Yeah.
probably be a little bit of that, but I'd expect United get it, and that means they'll probably make a little profit on this deal, which is
Uh,
good too.
Goalkeepers, Onana, Bayendier. What do you think will happen here?
I'm leaning towards Onana staying in part because again, it's tough to sell. It's tough to sell when you have a lot of value remaining, and substantial wages. The moves to Saudi have not really, like, nothing's really materialized, on that front for Onana
For
as of
Onana,
yet.
yeah,
Even though there's interest, nothing's really been there. I don't think a club in England, or not in England, but in Europe, is going to pay the necessary fee and wages that would make it a deal worth doing for United at this point. I think Bayindir will go though. I think Bayindir will probably go back to Turkey or something like that to play, and they'll get a young keeper. And we've seen a lot of very strong links on that side of it. And I'm quite confident in the fact that they want to get somebody in who can come and compete and probably be the first choice keeper. Um, but at least you have some experience there with Onana to go aside it. But I think they'll get. I think it's much more likely by India. Onana's a tough one. It is a tough one to move.
just
You
looking
know.
at Bayer Leverkusen squad there, just looking at who their goalkeepers are.
Yeah.
I was looking at Marikova. I was there. I was just
I was
wondering.
wondering about that too, as well. By the way, yes.
And actually, I think that he's would be quite decent in Germany.
Yeah.
Because if you look at why one of the reasons why he's struggling in England, it's not going to go away. It's the physicality, and then
Yeah.
you start getting targeted. So I think that's that if someone came in and offered United 40 million right now, I don't think Amarim would say I
No.
want him to stay.
Yeah, he would
Um,
accept that. Yeah.
yeah. So looking at it, one or two others here. Uh, Midfield, you do expect Toby Collier or anything to be still here? What outside of what I think Casemiro will stay.
Yeah,
Especially
I
not
think so
having no
too.
European football next season. I think that will suit him. That would be his last year. But in terms of midfield outgoings, do you see anyone else?
I think Collier could be sold. He's a young player that will have some value, and
Mm,
obviously as an academy player, again, you get that profit aspect of it where he's shown he
yeah,
can play. So you can get 10, 15 million for a player like that. It actually unlocks quite a lot in the market for United. And, again, I think it'll come down to one of those things like they're not going to be pushing him out the door. But if you need more money, you nobody's going to say no if the offer comes in for him. If the money is there for him to move to another club. Um, so I haven't heard too much about that because he's been out injured for such a long time, and I mean, he made his return essentially in that All-Star game yesterday,
yeah.
I believe, for the first time in a long, long time. But I imagine that is one that there will probably be some offers this year for him.
So if you look at Amarim's budget, James, right? I was just writing down the players here that could most likely be sold. Malacia, United will get some money from Alvaro Fernandez, Anthony, Rashford, Garnacho, Sancho. I mean, that's a significant chunk of change
Yeah,
right there.
probably potentially over 100 million in value
Yeah,
out of all of that. Yeah.
wages being saved, all that.
Yep.
But then, will Hoyland go? We don't know. So I think that United need to have wholesale changes. I agree, and I think that with some of the money that United and Amarim are guaranteed with these sales, there's flexibility to do stuff in the market, and I think that it won't be a terrible summer. I think United will get some really fairly decent players in that are improvement on what they have. I think if you look at when Chelsea won the league, they had no European football that season.
Hmm. Yep.
The year that Newcastle qualified for the Champions League, they had no European football that season. Liverpool 2014 should have won the league, had no European football that season. I think for United, not having European football obviously will have a negative impact financially, but in terms of where they're at, I think this is something that will help them. One or two things before we go. Delap looks like he's going to Chelsea.
Yep.
Not
Yep. And
devastated, James.
no, I mean, I still, I've been sitting here since we first talked about it. I think we've both kind of gone, he's 4 days older than Rasmus Hoyland.
Yeah, that's,
And if,
Daniel Luckhurst tweeted that. That was a
yeah,
good,
and
good, good fan from Sonny.
I looked at his numbers, his goals, his non-penalty goals this season is
Yeah,
the same as Rasmus Hoyland's last season in the Premier League in more minutes. And I just think I don't think personally, I've been always against. I think that the pressures of United are too high
yeah,
to bring in a young, inexperienced number 9 in particular. I think there's
yeah,
positions you can get away with it, but for a number 9 to lead the line at Manchester United, it's too much pressure. We saw what happened with Xerxes this year, even,
yep,
and he's even a little more experienced, and he's now. I think he's gotten past it, which is a good sign to him. But it is rough, man. It has destroyed Rasmus Højlund. We can see it, unfortunately, because he's confidence
yeah.
and all of that. It is
You're right.
hard, and he wasn't
Very.
even that bad last year. So it's like it destroys you, and it's really, really tough. So I think it's maybe a blessing in disguise to a degree there, even though it wasn't an expensive deal to get done.
It's when I was a young kid watching United in the 80s and early 90s and stuff, I was always envious of Liverpool because they always had prolific goal scorers. United had goal scorers, but no one extremely prolific.
Mm,
Mark Hughes, great goal scorer, score of great goals, not a great goal scorer. Bram McClure
right,
never
yeah.
got, they were never, and used to always say it's a graveyard for strikers. Gary Birtles, players that have come are big reputations, big money. and just couldn't consistently deliver. Because when you're not winning games, there's a couple of people that really get singled out. Strikers is one of them, and you can see like that's one of Hoyland's biggest impediments is
Mm,
because you can see that mentally he's struggling a lot. So yes, I'm really excited. Looking forward to Cunha. I think Cunha is a very, very intelligent signing for United.
yep.
He will get them goals. He's creative. He's also got a little bit of a bastard in him, which I like. He's
Hmm.
tough. He's got a bit of a Diego Costa in him a bit
We
to
talked
me.
about like the shirt's not going to weigh heavy on a player like that at
Yeah,
all.
no,
Like
no.
they'll be okay.
He's the guy that, when I watched United play Wolves a few weeks ago, he looked like a player that was auditioning, that was desperate to
Mm,
get into the United team, and never put any preconditions like you have to qualify for a Champions League or whatever. He just wants to be
I like
here.
that. Hmm.
Yeah. And he will be a significant improvement. If you look at a lot of games that United have drawn or lost, they had numerous chances to win them. One goal in those games, everything changes.
Yep.
And that's United need someone that you know will give them about 15 goals a season. Like when you get another striker in ahead of him, that really looking forward to that. But I think that there's equivalent alternatives to Delap that you can find
Yes.
anywhere. I don't think there's enormous equivalent alternatives to someone like Cunha. If I had
Yep.
to pick one of the two to sign, I would be picking Cunha. I done a
Yeah.
poll on my Twitter last week asking
Oh
who
yeah.
would they prefer, Delap or Yorkes, and it was emphatic about Yorkes. If you never end up with someone like Osman, yeah, I'm really excited about next season.
Yeah, for sure. And I really do like Victor Jokeris, and it's a type of
Yeah,
situation that it could. I mean, look, the simple fact of the matter is, 50 goal strikers do not grow on trees. I don't care what league they're
yeah.
in. And the Portuguese league is not a bad league for talent. So many good players have come out of there. They do not grow on trees. When you look at the list of players who's actually done it, they're all the greats of the game. You're talking about like the best. And I'm not saying he's that good. I'm not trying to
Well,
make
he
that
also has
comparison,
experience
but
playing in England.
yes, he played at Coventry, and he's been
Yeah,
he's not a one season wonder. He had two really good years at Coventry in the Championship, which is a league that tends to translate really well, to the Premier League in terms of growth and all of that. He's gotten better each season. Obviously, there's some advantages and disadvantages to coming in to a manager that and all of that. But it's a type of one where I feel that there is a chance it falls in United's lap a little bit because the other big clubs in England are looking elsewhere. Chelsea have their
yeah.
signing now. Arsenal seem like
Arsenal
they're
getting
moving for Benjamin
Sesko.
Sheshko, and
Yeah.
Liverpool are spending buckets on Wirtz. I don't think Gyökeres is the type of player they want to sign right now either. So it could kind of fall in their lap, a really, really good striker. And if there's this kind of money, you can do that. Brian and Bumo, we had that whole fun argument about him a while back and ended up on the same page,
Man, hold up.
like some
In all
weeks ago. And
seriousness, I look back on some of the shit I said about Embuemo, and it was ignorant beyond belief. Like it really was. I had so many preconceptions in my head about what he was,
sure.
his height, everything, and I'm like,
Yeah.
fuck, I'm wrong about everything.
Yeah.
Like, and yeah, no, I take the L on that, and
Mm-mm.
to me, like, I wouldn't be devastated at someone like an Embuemo.
Yeah, yeah, and they face a lot of competition, specifically from Newcastle on that deal,
Mm.
who can offer Champions League. And to be fair, Newcastle are really done all right on their trajectory. That as a club where they're heading, I can see why it'd be an attractive option. But I think at the stage where we're at, and this is where they have to earn their money. Um, there will be money to spend with you when you look at these sales and things that are happening. There will, like we've gone through. They're going to have to convince some players to come,
To
to
me,
get the
Jamie,
best people.
with Newcastle, the fact they're in the Champions League is not to me something that should attract a player. I mean,
Sure. Yes.
Victoria Pilsen are in the Champions League.
Yeah.
They have the same opportunity of winning it as Newcastle do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can understand if you're going to a club that's serious. I mean, Newcastle are a good club now out there. I'm not saying that, but they're not winning the
Yep.
Champions League and they're not going to be
Yeah.
competitive in it. So, there's a lot of clubs you can go to just to play in it.
Yeah.
But do you want to go to making a whole career decision on that?
Correct. Yeah. I
To
agree.
me is Yeah, that is yeah.
It's always
So
stood out to me, like, if you're making that decision off of 1 year, it shows pretty
yeah,
bad judgment to me in general. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but, I think United will have to do a bit of convincing of some players that the whole plan is going the right direction. I think getting Cunha in the door really early actually helps with that a lot, though, because it's like, "Look, here's a top performer, and, we're building something with this." But, yeah, that's they gotta do their job on that respect and now make those things happen.
all right, mate. Quick one before we go. Anyone else in terms of incomings that we should keep an eye out for?
Ooh, I mean, you mentioned Ederson because there's obviously once they solve the forward line, obviously they're
Yeah,
gonna probably need a midfielder.
yeah,
Um, they're gonna, Christian Eriksen played 1,500 minutes still. You still have to replace that somehow, somewhere. And there's likely going to be other departures as well. So Ederson, but Ederson and the keepers, Lamens. There's been a lot of talk of the young keeper, Lamens, who's plays in Belgium, I think it is, right? There's been a lot of that. So, yeah, I mean, gotta I think they'll sort a forward out, and then we'll start looking at some other names, another forward at least.
yeah. And it's encouraging that United are moving swiftly. So we'll hopefully not have a summer long of sagas. I think that is, when we talk about the differences that Ineos have brought, that is definitely one that is obvious, where the way they move on signings is, much more expeditious. All right, matey. Thank you. We'll leave it
Of
there.
course.
Thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast. As always, we'll be back consistently throughout the summer.
Yes,
So
sir.
we'll do more and more of these transfers, podcasts, and what have you. So thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast, for following myself and James. If you are someone that doesn't subscribe, please hit subscribe, whether it's my channel or James's, doesn't matter. That's the best way you can support both of us. All the best, mate, and we'll be back again next week. Cheers, TMZ.
See you later.